Hello, Facebook people. I'm back again. I know I was just with you, but as I told you, I have a great show lined up for you today, a very important topic with some very important people. Uh, Let me introduce to you YahNé Ndgo, friend of mine and a mother and activist and an artist. She is the chief visionary officer of Deep Blue Woman Company and a member of Black Lives Matter Philadelphia, the Black Alliance for Peace, and the collective building Ubuntu Nation. And please correct me on my pronunciations. Also, we have Krystal Strong, is a scholar and an organizer. Her research and teaching focus on youth activism in education in Africa and the diaspora. She is an organizer for Black Lives Matter Philly. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome YahNé and Krystal.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Here we go, here we go. All right, ladies. So, YahNé contacted me on I think she DM'd me or she contacted me. She told me today was an important day, that a platform was needed for some conversation about a story that is just so horrific, and I'm going to leave YahNé to explain it, but that's why she's here, and that's why these ladies have joined us. Let me start with you, YahNé. What's today, and why is it important, this remembrance?
Well, in 2010, on this day, the police in Detroit broke into or bust into a family's home looking for someone. And there was a little girl who was asleep. That was her grandmother's home. She was asleep on the sofa. And I guess the movement and the banging coming in, she startled. And upon seeing her, they shot. And she was shot and murdered on her while sleeping on her grandmother's sofa. She was 7 years old, and so we have so many instances of these kinds of incidents where individuals in our community are senselessly and thoughtlessly murdered and without hesitation, and of all different ages, from children to seniors, men and women, and of all different mental states. And there's no safety, there's no protection, there's no consequence. Very seldom is there consequence. And we, as Black Lives Matter Philly, as a chapter, we wanted to take this moment and remember this incident and use it to honor her, and also to lift this reality as it relates to the other children from our community, and also women and trans women and femmes who have also been victims of state-sanctioned violence, and particularly that community, because our whole community is under attack. And a lot of times people, we think about and we talk about our men, which is very important. We talk about what happens to our men. We talk about the incarceration of our men. But these things are happening to our women and our femmes and our children as well. And so we wanted to speak to this and lift the names and the lives and the dreams of our entire community, with a focus on our women and femmes and children.
Wow. Wow, that's a great introduction, a great way to start the conversation. What about you, Krystal? Why is today important, and what are you trying to convey?
So 2 years ago, in 2016, I participated in my first Black Lives Matter Philadelphia event, not as an organizer for the chapter, but just as a Black person, an individual who cares about Black people and wants us to live. And that event was the second annual Ayanna's Dreams commemoration. So this event has been my entry point into the Black Lives Matter movement as a participant, as an organizer. But I want to amplify what YahNé has sort of put forth, which is that, one of the things that we have to contend with as a community, as we are saying that, yes, our lives matter, we deserve to live, is, do we really mean that all Black lives actually matter, right? When we think about who we show up for, that says something about our values as a community. One thing I've noticed in, many years of doing organizing work is that there are some things that seem to catalyze us more than others. There are some things that seem to make us rush into the streets more than others. And I have to say that part of the call for Ayanna's dreams and for a day of action for Ayanna is that we have to do more to show up for and protect our children. We have to do more to show up and protect our Black cis women, our Black trans women, our Black femmes, right? And so I think part of the larger narrative around this event as well is that we have to think about the people who are at the margins, right? The people who don't seem to get the most attention, and bring those to the center. And in many respects, commemorating Aiyana Stanley-Jones and really focusing our attention to the Black children who we're losing at the hands of state violence. I mean, Ayanna's case is a case of a child who, I hate to say it in such crude terms, but we should feel uncomfortable about the fact that a child had her brains blown out on her grandmother's couch. How many of us have fallen asleep on our parents' couch, on our caregiver's house, on our caregiver's couch, and we woke up? We had the security to dream while doing so, right? And part of, the call here is that, we ought to be able to feel that sense of security, all of us, right? And so really the Ayanna's Dreams event, the Day of Action for Ayanna, is about expanding the narrative around protecting Black life to include all of us. It's also about remembering this particular child who did not deserve to have her brains blown out at the age of 7. Ayanna should be 15 years old today and thinking about all of the things that she dreams for herself in her future, right? And so that's what we're here to really amplify.
Well, I want to another great explanation, a great cause, a great reason for us to have this conversation. I was looking at the story, and I just want to say, when YahNé approached me about it, I was immediately grabbed. Once I knew what this was about, I looked it up, and I'm like, my God, of course. I mean, I can't imagine anyone not feeling that way about it, but as Krystal pointed out, there are some issues that we get up for and others we don't get up for as much. Folks, I just want to share with you, now this is just Wikipedia. There are a lot of articles, some of them differ and they point blank different ways, but based on the Wikipedia, it looks like no one was held accountable for the death of Aiyana Stanley-Jones. It looks as if the officer, there was 2 mistrials in this case. The officers one of his stories was that the grandmother touched the gun, and that's why the gun went off and discharged and hit the child. But there was no DNA, no evidence of that once they investigated that. But there was still a mistrial in this case, and I don't want to get long-winded at all, but I do want to say this is totally obviously this child wasn't breaking any laws. I don't even know what can be said about our justice system as it pertains to that. YahNé, this story, I know YahNé is a mom. YahNé, does this touch you in a specific way just because of the fact that you are a mother?
Well, it's funny because that's exactly what I was thinking about as Krystal was speaking. I have a 21-year-old daughter, and I live now in the South, and my daughter is still in Philadelphia. And I haven't seen her in several months. I haven't seen her since December. And so I'm traveling to Philadelphia and I'm about to see her. And I'm just so excited. I've been so excited about seeing her. Like I keep looking at her picture on my phone and I keep kissing her picture. And I just can't wait to see her. And I think about her at 7. And I just can't even imagine, like I've been thinking about it all day. because I'm thinking about that family who lost that child. And I remember when my daughter was little, in fact, on Mother's Day, she put up a little video. She had a necklace that I had given her. It said, "Love you to the moon and back." And we both had that necklace. And so she had put up a Snapchat of herself wearing the necklace and listening to Beautiful. Remember that song? "I just want you to know you're my favorite girl." And when Ishara was about that age, I used to sing that song to her. And I was thinking about how I would sing that song and how she would be dancing, along and so happy. The two of us were just so happy together. And I remember thinking about how when she was 7, I would think about what she was going to be. And I would wonder like how she's going to be, what she's going to grow up, how she's going to look, how she's going to sound, what her activities are going to be. And I just can't even imagine having her stolen away from me, and in such an extremely violent and vile way on top of it, and to have to live with that for the rest of your life. It's so horrifying. And I just, I think it's so important to remember the lives of people who are lost in that way, and to remember the lives that they were a part of as well. The people who are now, like our community, we're going without so many people. We have so many people who are taken from us, who have purpose in the lives of their families, who have purpose in the lives of their community, of this country, and of this planet. And their purpose and their lives are snuffed out, and then it is excused. And every time there's an excuse made for it. And in some way, like just like what you described in the situation, blame is attempted to be placed on the grandmother. When Tamir Rice was murdered, they tried to put the blame on his parents. Because they allowed him to marker off the thing that made it apparent that was a toy gun. When you have children who have guns, who are being taught how to shoot guns, in a variety of communities, real guns. That's not an excuse to ride up and shoot down this young man with no attempt to de-escalate something that obviously, in hindsight, needed no de-escalation. Right. So yes, it does. It affects me as a mother, and I feel for that family and that community who have to remember her without holding her, and and to hold that light, after all of these years, and continue to keep her spirit alive. It's horrifying and it's traumatizing, and people try to diminish how traumatizing it is to our community, and not just the families who knew these people personally, but to our entire community. Every time we see this happen, every time this is communicated to us, that our lives really don't matter, and that we have to push back and say that they do in the first place.
Absolutely. Krystal, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I would, and I'm really grateful to YahNé for being so just transparent and vulnerable in this moment, right? Because I think there's a way that we have become so conditioned to how traumatizing the recurrence of these events every single day. If it's not a killing of an unarmed Black person, it's police being called on a Black person who was just living their lives. They're sitting in a Starbucks, right? They're entering their own home. They're napping on a couch in the place where they reside in a common area, right? And so part of what these are indications of is the fact that when you are in a white supremacist structure that is global in orientation, part of what that means is that some people are always going to be blameless, right? Their lives are always going to be assigned value, right? But then there's those of us, all of us on this, in this session, all of us who are Black, right? And who are people of color, who we do not have access to blamelessness, right? Wow. Our very breathing, our very breath, our very existence in this world is criminalized, right? And so there is no safety, there is no solace until we dismantle the structure itself, right? That is the only thing that will keep, you know, our 7-year-olds, our children, ourselves safe. And I also want to say that, you know, I want to send love to the folks who loved Aiyana, right? I don't think we lift up enough the people who are left behind. You know, I feel trauma about Aiyana, but that does not compare to the trauma that, you know, her family, her grandmother, her parents, her loved ones still bear. You know, when we were doing some of the research and putting together and organizing, you know, the campaigns year in and year out, you know, one of the images that I can never forget is an image of the couch. It was a white leather couch sitting on the porch of Aiyana's family's house, covered in her blood.
And I remember, as I'm sure you saw also, you may have seen the video of Aiyana's grandmother at the trial talking to the officer about what happened, you know, and it's so heartbreaking to even to observe or even imagine, you know, to be in that situation, you know, and then to your job is somehow to figure out how to continue living a normal life after this happens to you, or even after you've observed this happen to other individuals. And it's baffling for me when time after time there's a life taken in this way, and the way that it sets me back, you know, it affects my ability to function. I mean, there have been times when I've gone a whole week unable to function after observing, you know, the murder. You know, I don't watch the videos very much, but I saw both Alton Sterling and Philando's murders. And I couldn't function for a week. And it's so confusing to me that there's any group of people, regardless of who was on the other end of that, that criminal activity of that murder. Like, how is it that people are able to just go on with life? It's another, just the way that the people respond, it's another way of diminishing in a very personal way. I feel diminished by the way that people react with limited reaction to what has happened to this other individual, and how easily they can dismiss the significance of it simply because it's a Black child, a Black woman, a Black man. So I don't, and you know, and it's a funny thing because I recently went through a situation where I had someone where I was in danger here where I am. And I left in the middle of the night in a cab, and was later told that I should have just called the police by, you know, one of my neighbors who happens to be white. And I didn't even feel like I could get into a conversation with him about why I didn't feel comfortable calling the police in this southern city in the middle of the night. There was no way. I felt as afraid of them as I felt of the person who I would have been calling the police on. And there is a large number of people who that makes no sense. They can't even understand that, because the reality of what's going on, they're so easily able to disconnect from the humanity of that individual who's gone through that in a way that I cannot. I know that I'm looking at myself when I see one of these individuals from our community, you know, laid out on the ground after they've been murdered by a police officer. I know that I'm looking just as easily at myself. When Sandra Bland was murdered, I saw myself. And
you know, moment of clarity for a lot of us, right? And I think part of what, in the background of what YahNé is saying, is that you know, there's a way that sometimes when these incidents happen, and they literally, you know, Malcolm X grassroots movement, you know, did a study years ago, and they said every 28 hours. So we know that this is going to happen again, you know, within a day or so, right? And, you know, many of us, and I understand this as an attempt to cope within a structure that, you know, there's a certain futility, right, in trying to navigate in some ways, because the reality is that it could be any of us. The very same weekend, the very same day that Sandra Bland was pulled over by a police officer and had, you know, an exchange with that police officer. I myself was pulled over by the police and had an exchange with a police officer. And you really do begin to see, you understand yourself as fundamentally living and breathing and operating in a system where it could be you or another loved one. And I think, you know, part of what can be a bit frustrating, especially when you understand these larger structural systemic issues, is that we sometimes, in an attempt to cope, begin to act as if we can become, you know, we can avoid this reality by behaving in a certain way, or moving to a certain zip code, or sending our kids to a certain school, or pulling up your pants, or not listening to, I mean, the list of things that people are policed for while Black, that people are killed for while Black, is about as long as the Bible. Right? And so how, when you understand that there's a futility in trying to effectively navigate this, I would hope that this would compel us to act, that it would compel us to fundamentally shift these conditions.
Absolutely. You know, I just got through covering a couple of stories. One was Nico House. I think YahNé may know Nico House. He's a journalist. He's been very active politically. He's one of these platforms you can go to get out of stories such as this. You know, he's been chronicling his run-ins with police, and they range from doing 5 miles under the speed limit to being present at a fight he tried to break up, to cops coming to arrest 2 white women who were fighting and end up arresting him, who wasn't fighting. It's just so, and I agree with you, Krystal, that people try to cope with it. They try, because it is hard to face that there's really no way out of Blackness. Like, I also covered today a story of T.I., and I usually don't cover that type of celebrity stuff, but I covered it, Krystal and YahNé, because I wanted people to realize that even though that T.I. has money, though some of that's been called into question lately, he still can't get away from the flack. He's a Black guy living in a very rich white neighborhood, and to them, he's an outsider. So his money cannot take the place of government reform, political action, and justice in this country. Krystal, does that make any sense to you? Am I on the right track with that?
I think you are on the right track in the sense that we can't, you know, as you are alluding to, we can't buy our way out of this, in the sense that, you know, we can't perform acceptability. You know, we can't, you know, educate ourselves into being accepted in a fundamentally white supremacist structure, right? No amount of resources will solve that. I mean, if we're talking about building power, certainly resources are needed to do that. If we're talking about building institutions that actually serve us, right, sure, resources will solve that. But if you think that by moving yourself, your Black ass, to a predominantly white neighborhood, that's not going to solve the problem, right? Because this is a collective problem, and those are individual solutions. So the solution has to be collective in orientation. It has to be structural in orientation, right? You know, no amount of speaking the right, you know, accented English. I have hella degrees, right? But that doesn't mean shit.
Right.
You know, in terms of the precariousness that surrounds my life as a Black woman, right? Regardless of all of those things. And so, you know, as Black Lives Matter Philly, as one of the many organizations that are working for Black liberation, nothing short of Black liberation will solve this problem.
What say you, YahNé, to that? When Krystal speaks of this problem, something we can't buy our way out of, that is structural. I know you often see people refer to racism as something individual, but what do you have to say to that, YahNé, about this individual aspect, the way that they make the boogeyman this one person? But what's your take on that?
Well, you know, I think it's really, I think about this when people argue about like racism and what racism is. And, you know, they'll refer to the Webster's dictionary, not even realizing how supremacist that is, right? That there's this entity that defines what words are real words, what words mean, and everyone else collectively has to bow down to Webster. You know, and so even like this whole idea, I was talking about this, I think with Krystal before, with like the use of the word conversate is my favorite example. People are always wanting to, conversate is not a word. It became this big thing when people were saying conversate, and conversate is not a word, it's converse. But I know so many people who use the word conversate. Who gets to say it's not a word?
And then Webster
back
and said it is a word.
Now, right. So now suddenly we can say it. It's like how dreadlocks were so terrible and dirty, and then all of a sudden white people were wearing them, and all of a sudden now dreadlocks are in, or big lips. You know, when people wanted big lips, it has to have this white stamp to be acceptable. You know, it's ridiculous. And so people will go with the definition. Well, racism is this thing. And the reality is that our community, we are one of the communities. Like anti-Blackness is the foothold of oppression. All of the other forms of oppression, they all measure against the oppression of Black people. And so we get to define racism. We get to define it. And we needed a word that was not bigotry, that was not prejudice, that spoke to what it is that we experience on a systemic level. What is redlining? What is the lack of educational resources in our community? What is it about our community and how our community is set next to all of these environmental hazards? You know, that were placed there because our communities were created intentionally as sacrifice zones and ghettos, so that there was a place to put those hazards when a place was needed. This is systemic. What is it about? How do we use? What word do we use to define the reality that there are more Black men imprisoned than there were enslaved? To define the differences. People always want to talk about the women wanting their whole damn dollar, but white women get a lot more of that dollar than Black men. There's none of that conversation happening. What is it about the appropriation of all of the experiences of our liberation movements, of our leaders, all of that, and the co-opting of all that we do in order to raise ourselves? All of this is part of something that is more than what any individual does. It is systemic. And just like we as individuals can't move ourselves out of the reality of these system-wide prejudices and these system-wide oppressions, no individual in our community can impose that on another community within the context of this white supremacist-owned society or driven society. And so, yeah, the idea of like, well, Black people are being racist, or Black people not being able to use this term in this discussion around whether or not this term racism really means what we're saying it means. It does, because we said so. And we have authority in this world. Our voice has authority in this world, and as much authority as Webster does. And in my in my world, significantly more authority. So, so I just basically really pretty much ignore those individuals who try to diminish the reality of systemic prejudice that is what racism represents. The word racism represents.
Wow. You know, I'd like to take this opportunity because both of you are connected to the BLM, Black Lives Matter Philadelphia, and you know, I always get this pushback whenever we have conversations about BLM. There are people saying, well, you know, you only focus on police shootings. Why don't we focus on other issues? Could you ladies, one by one, speak and tell these people, please, what BLM is doing and what other organizations do, and how not one organization does everything, but do it your own way, please.
Right. I think I'm really grateful to you for pulling out this thread of conversation, because I think it's one of the most misunderstood aspects of our current movement work. I also think it's one of the most dangerous set of perspectives that undermine our movement work and our capacity to, you know, continue on the path of liberation. And what I'm referring to is the fact that, you know, Black Lives Matter is a hashtag, right? You know, we also know that Black Lives Matter is an organization that's, you know, has chapters around the world. But apart from that, you know, Black Lives Matter is continuing a long, you know, march, decades, hundreds of years long march to liberate Black people, right? And, you know, the movement for Black Lives, which is, you know, a designation that I think emerged in a very useful way to differentiate a single entity from this larger landscape of Black people who are struggling and striving to build with each other and to transform our conditions, right? So, you know, when we talk about Black Lives Matter Philly in particular, I mean, we actually, because Philadelphia is a city that, unlike other cities where Black Lives Matter chapters have formed, we have lots of Black organizations that are radical, that are revolutionary in orientation, and that do direct action work around police killings very well, right? And they've been doing it for a long time. And as a chapter, I think we understood that and support that, but felt that, you know, we need to find another niche. There's lots of work that is required for our struggle. And while the killings may bring us to the streets, right, when we think about sustaining a movement, there's other work that needs to be done in addition to that. So many of the things that Black Lives Matter is currently doing is really focused on, you know, creating conditions for Black people to live and to thrive. So we do a lot of work. We're one of the sponsoring organizations for the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund. You may have heard of the Mama's Day bailout campaign that started last year, right? Around this time, around Mother's Day, Philadelphia, a number of organizations, of which BLM Philly was one, raised over $60,000 in the span of a week and bailed out about a dozen Black mothers from jail.
Wow.
This year, I think collectively we raised over close to $80,000. And I think the number is around 12 or 13 Black mothers have been bailed out last week, actually. And, you know, we continue to raise money to, number one, get out of, you know, the jails, which, you know, many people are awaiting trial and behind bars because they can't afford cash bail, right? And so intervening in the conversation around cash bail reform as one entry point into dismantling, you know, mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex, that's one area of focus. Another thing we do apart from the Aiyana's Dreams campaign as well, we do a lot of things that have to do with Black joy and Black healing, right? In order to be able to survive, in order to be able to repair our relationships with each other, we have to be whole. We have to have spaces that allow us to heal and be in community with one another. So we often, or in the past, we've hosted things called Black Healing Matters events, where you can come, be around other Black people. You can, have body workers and healers who can support you in crafting and forming a self-care practice for yourself that allows you to deal with the trauma that we face on a daily basis, right? In addition to that, we do some coalition work with other groups on a variety of different issues that sort of pop up. We also have some work that we're doing with young people. As part of the Aiyana's Dream campaign this year, we did a series of workshops with young people around Aiyana's story and also their dreams. You can look at some of that on our social media accounts. But in general, our focus is really on, supporting Black people in our survival and attempting to work with other organizations to build the kinds of institutions that will ultimately provide alternatives and are a pathway towards the liberation that we seek collectively.
Wow. Got it. YahNé, do you have any comments, YahNé, about Black Lives Matter and some of the myths that exist? You've been on the internet. You know what's going on. You know what the comments are that I'm going to have, that I know my people aren't going to make because they've just become educated. YahNé?
Well, I mean, I think that Krystal did an excellent job of speaking to the way that our chapter works. And I think the important thing for people to understand is that that we are chapters, and every chapter is a reflection of the community that built that chapter and the landscape in that particular community, including what's already going on there. As Krystal mentioned, we support the good work that other organizers and organizations are doing, and we don't have to duplicate that work or compete in that work. And we invite those as well to join us in the things that we are doing. And then we're constantly working to think about and identify what it is that we have the ability to touch as it relates to actually something that's transformative of a person's life. So like me, for instance, I'm not real big on the marches and rallies. Like I will support some of that, but I'm not very big on marches and rallies because I like to touch lives. The bailout fund, they're actual individuals. They walk out and they are hugged and greeted by their family, children's mothers return home. And, and often these are individuals whose so-called crimes are so petty, so benign, but they are kept away from their families and their lives, and so that's something that actually touches individuals' lives, and that's what I think is really the important component of what we do. Is when we're working to figure out how we're going to actually, like, I'd rather touch one life. I'd rather put one person in a home for a year than have a march and with 100,000 people, personally. I mean, I get that there's education and things like that, but we're about touching the lives of people and make actually transformative work. And so I just think and that's important that's an important piece of our chapter that I think is matters, and I see that in the work of many of the other chapters. And as it relates to the idea of like police violence versus community violence, that's another conversation that people bring up. Like, why as if we don't care. Somehow, us caring about police killing our children means that we don't care if someone in our own community hurts or harms or damages our children. And it's just an absolutely ridiculous way to try to undermine the validity of this particular issue. If I fall and I have a broken shoulder and I have a sprained ankle, I'm not going to ignore the ankle because of the shoulder or ignore both because there's two things happening. I'm going to pay attention to all of these things that are happening, and us paying attention to the fact that the state is coming in and bringing damage to our communities and murdering people in our communities does not mean that we are not also working on addressing the issues that increase the kinds of activities that cause us to hurt each other. And I do want to just also point out the fact that this is, generally speaking, you know, people don't talk about white on white crime. People don't, like, most people, when they harm each other, when they harm people in their own community, they harm the people that are closer to them. It's not very frequent that people go outside of those communities. And when it does happen, it seems to be more likely, you know, these big white mass murder kind of killings that where it goes outside of their community. But for some reason, that criticism is only levied against our community, and in order to silence the importance and the validity of these other conversations that we're having about prejudices, bigotry, oppression that is systemic. And that is the whole point around that particular issue. That is a system that is imposing that on us. And it's actually the same system that imposes the conditions that increase the amount of crime that happens inside of our communities, our redlined, intentionally built ghetto sacrifice zone communities.
Right. And I think part of the point that YahNé is alluding to is the fact that people act as if we are not able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We can do that. And in fact, we must do that. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think another thing that YahNé is alluding to that I want to amplify as well is when we talk about state violence, and we are very intentional around framing this action around Aiyana Stanley-Jones's killing by the police, state violence is not just when the police kill us. The conditions of our schools are state violence. The fact that you do not have access to healthy food, or you have access to foods that are cancer producing, that is also state violence. The fact that you do not have a living wage is state violence, right? And so we need to work towards, and we need to fight towards eliminating all of those forms of violence, because guess what? As YahNé said, they're all interconnected, right? And they're all rooted in capitalism, right? They're rooted in the devaluation of our lives, period. Colonial. White settler colonial. I mean, name all of the isms: racism, you know, capitalism, imperialism, white settler colonialism, right? All of these things are bound together. And our solutions have to be bound to all of those, addressing all of those things.
And this is an international issue as well. I mean, when you look at the violence that, and, you know, and that as a member of the Black Alliance for Peace as well, and what, you know, and what I know you had Ajamu Baraka on recently speaking about this, you know, there's an absolute connection. When you look at which communities are bombed and undermined globally, they are predominantly communities that where the people there are Black or indigenous. There's Black and indigenous communities that are the primary victims, and again, the children in those communities are completely dismissed. You know, and that happens. You see bombs being dropped on children, those Palestinian children who are murdered, and people saying that, well, if they had been in school, then they would have been. They wouldn't have been shot by police, and they were simply peacefully protesting. You know, what the mining that children in Africa do in order for us to have our technology, that wouldn't be happening in European countries. There would be something else figured out. You know, but the lives of our children are diminished in all parts of this globe. And that has to be also recognized. These are all forms of terrorism. As Krystal was saying, poverty is terrorism. Hunger is terrorism.
Well, I would like to hope that my audience, they're aware. We spent so much time talking about Russia or pushing back on people talking about Russia. I kind of got into this, YahNé and Krystal, thinking that I wanted people to see the bridge between what our media does on a daily basis. So just like we've been hearing nothing but Russia talk, the media picks and chooses the stories that they're going to play. They pick and choose the stories that they're going to bring to the public awareness. Same thing goes for police shootings. Those are the stories that the media chooses. But I'm sure that any family that you go visit who would talk about the poverty situation, they would love to get amplification on that issue. It's just there's no cameras there. Same thing goes for when there is community violence. It's not hot enough. There's no sizzle. So they're not going to film that. They're not going to put that out. They're not going to give that exposure that it deserves. And I would hope that my audience is I know this word is getting played out, but woke enough to understand that the victims don't control the media. And that's why platforms like this are important. Folks, I want to thank you so much. Krystal, could you start by telling people how to find out more about your work and about your organization?
Sure. Well, I would love for people who are curious to know more about what Black Lives Matter Philly does. You can find us on all platforms. Look us up at Black Lives Matter Philly on Facebook, at BLM Philly on Instagram, on Twitter. Check us out, see what we're doing. We also have a website, which you can find linked on all of the platforms that I just mentioned. Check us out and support the work. Tell us what you're working on. We want to amplify, the connections between all of what I hope we're doing to change our conditions.
And Krystal, do you have a Twitter or your own Facebook as well?
I do. I'm at Krystal Strong on Facebook and at Miss K Strong on both Twitter and Instagram.
Gotcha. Look, I'm not trying to get in your business. I just thought people might want to follow you now that you spoke so eloquently. What about you, YahNé? How can people find out more about the great work you do?
Well, I wanted to say, also I want to tell people what the website is for Black Lives Matter Philly is blmphilly.com. And there's also a website for the campaign of remembrance around Aiyana's murder, which is AiyanasDreams.com, which is AIYANAS dreams.com. My company's website, my company is Deep Blue Woman Company. The website is bluewoman.com, and that's BLUWOMYN.com. It's actually password protected. It's being redeveloped. It'll be going live next week, so people can check that out. And my website is YahNé Ndgo, YahNe Ndgo.com. And my social media is all YahNé Ndgo. My Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and LinkedIn are all YahNé Ndgo.
There you go. There you go. Folks, please go to blmphilly.com for more information. Aiyana's Dreams, AIYANASDREAMS.com. YahNeNdgo.com. We also have Krystal Strong at Krystal Strong at Miss K Strong and YahNe Ndgo, YahNe Ndgo.com yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And there's also the Black Alliance for Peace, which is blackallianceforpeace.
That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff, but it's worth it, guys. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Krystal.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say thank you for having us. Thank you for providing the space that you cultivate so much for these kind of conversations around issues that relate to our people and our struggles. And thank you for, allowing us to be here today, which is literally the 8th anniversary of the day that Aiyana Stanley-Jones was taken from us. So thank you for providing us a space to really honor her life.
Well, you're absolutely welcome, and I didn't see a way that I could possibly refuse. Thank you.
Tim, I just wanted to mention, I'm sorry, that sure. On Sunday, we're actually going to be holding space in the city of Philadelphia at Love Park, right across the street from City Hall, on that Sunday the 20th at 3 p.m. And so we will be gathering there with people to remember and honor Aiyana and other women and children and trans women and femmes who have been victims of state-sanctioned violence against them. And so we welcome anyone who will be in the area who wants to stand and honor and remembrance of, of our relatives, and to join us there, and just hold that space for a little while on Sunday at 3 p.m.
Sunday at 3 p.m. YahNé, could you please give the Black Alliance website one more time? I think a Jama would be like, "What's up, Tim? Let me promote that one more time." What's that again, YahNé?
It's blackallianceforpeace.com.
That's it.
So it's just all the words spelled out.
Peace.com. All right, now. Thank you once again, ladies, for joining us. You have enlightened. You have dropped knowledge. You have done it so passionately. I appreciate you so much for choosing my platform to have this conversation. It means so much. It's so invaluable. Thank you once again. Everybody out there, please follow these young ladies, the amazing stories, also, more importantly, amazing causes that we all should get behind. I appreciate you, and I will see you tomorrow night.
Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome.